After a wild guest episode of the Risky Roadz podcast, I, Caleb, get back to business with a double player profile pod. I'll also be bringing you up to speed on all the future recruiting class news that you need to know, along with a new Husker commit for the 2020 class. So today I'm going to be talking about Brady Hyman and Carrington Davis, who are both members of the 2018 freshman class. And I'll start with Brady Hyman. On huskers.com, he's listed as 6'11", 215 pounds, which is a little concerning considering that is the same weight as Nana Ackenton and Carrington Davis, who are both 6'6" players for the Huskers this season. He even said in an interview recently that he was getting destroyed by all the other bigs on the team, which is pretty understandable, making the jump from Class B Nebraska high school basketball all the way into the Big Ten. But I don't think we got him for necessarily what he will do this year. Hopefully he can produce on that level, but I think we're looking to develop him for future years, and I'll get into maybe what some of those skills can be. But first, let's start with what he did in his high school seasons. To start with, his senior season, he averaged 17.3 points, 7.5 defensive rebounds, 2.5 offensive rebounds, which adds up to 10 total rebounds. He had 2.1 assists per game, 0.8 steals per game, and 4.4 blocks a game. So these are interesting stats. I like the points. Those were up his senior season. They actually steadily progressed up from 7.4 freshman, 13.0 sophomore, 15.7 his junior year, and then 17.3. And I think that's going to be the most important part. His just ability to score on defense or score on offense, and just really have ball skills, develop all these different offensive weapons, because that's really probably the most difficult thing for him to learn. I do like the blocks, though, as you've probably heard me say, I'm not a huge blocks fan. But I was watching a video on somebody who seemed to know a lot about him, and he said that those blocks don't come from him really like jumping all the time and just trying to swat everything away. It really comes from him getting in really good position and putting his hands up, which is good because, as he also mentioned, he doesn't have a long wingspan, which did concern me quite a bit. That really can just make or break how much potential he has as a player. But obviously, this is kind of a college level. He doesn't have to have a 6-inch longer wingspan than his body, like all the NBA players have. But I think he can kind of hopefully get big enough eventually, maybe next year or the year after that, to play defense kind of how Tanner Borkard does and be just even taller. And that could just help him play defense on a Big Ten level and then be able to contribute on the offensive end. One crazy stat about the blocks is that he actually averaged a crazy 7.4 blocks per game in his sophomore season, which I'm not sure why it went down so much, but I think that kind of maybe points to him not trying to just block every single shot and not seeing that as the most important part of his game, which I think is pretty important. I think there has been some interesting discussion about what position Brady will be playing at. Maybe not even this year. Who knows? He may end up redshirting or not playing a lot. But as his career progresses, and I think he's more of a stretch four player, but with the amount of big guys that we have, he'll end up playing a role more like how Roby's playing now, where, I mean, he's even much taller than Roby, so I can't imagine he won't play the 5, just because I don't see us really even recruiting many 5s who are going to be like bigger than him. So he'll probably still play even kind of a 4 as a defensive position, but like power forward role on offense without a traditional center on our team. And one of the reasons I see that is because he really is trying to develop a 3, and I think that could be probably the most important part of his game, besides just getting bigger, which will obviously happen. The shot is obviously a less surefire thing just by putting work in, but if he does that and develops that, I could see him as maybe a player like Walter Pitchford was, where he's coming up, trailing, being able to dribble, and just being like a really good presence on the 3-point line, drawing people out of the lane, and just trying to hang in there on defense and play pretty well against their bigs. Sadly, I wasn't able to collect much more data than that on him. I, for some reason, had trouble finding video of his senior season, and I didn't think that it was fair to evaluate him on his junior season, especially when he's, even this year, going to be a player who's very much still developing. So we're going to move on to our next player, Carrington Davis. As I mentioned earlier, Carrington Davis is 6'6", 215 pounds, as listed by huskers.com, and he is from St. Louis, Missouri. He committed to Nebraska in March of 2018, and he also received offers from St. Louis, Middle Tennessee State, and Kansas State. One of the interesting and a little bit crazy things about Carrington Davis is that he did not actually start on his high school team last year, which seems pretty ridiculous for a Division I recruit, but his team featured 4 top 100 recruits in the nation this year. One of those being the number 1 recruit, according to ESPN's Top 100. He was also kept a little bit on the sidelines this year because of a hip injury, which obviously prevented him from playing and developing, especially on a team with such fierce competition. In previous years, he did not play for Montverde, the team he played for his senior year. He played in St. Louis as a sophomore and junior, and there, his junior season, he averaged 19 points and 6 rebounds for a prep school whose name I just pronounced so badly that I just had to delete it. And that team actually had some pretty incredible players, including Jason Tatum and Iowa forward Tyler Cook, who I think destroyed us last year, even though I think we still got the win. But I'd be really interested to see how Jason Tatum would have influenced kind of how he played and practiced, because he has an interesting story. Jason actually has been training with Drew Hanlon, who has kind of become a star as a trainer in the NBA. He works with many, I think 9 or 10 different players who are on NBA rosters, including Markelle Fultz, Joel Embiid, now Mo Bamba, I think, Bradley Beal, I'm pretty sure. And he worked with Tatum since he was in like 8th grade and just said, okay, we're developing you for the NBA. And so one of the reasons Tatum was only drafted 3rd, which was still incredible, but he probably would have been higher if he would have had a jump shot his season at Duke. But Hanlon said, nope, we're only developing you for the NBA. And they actually worked on his shot last, which is interesting because last year he shot great and nobody thought he would, but they kind of knew, well, he's just going to have it down, and he didn't even really practice it until he started his years in the NBA. So hopefully we get some similar development from Carrington Davis, except towards the college level over the next few years. And I really think I do see some good intangibles and things to base off of that he can get better at. When I watched some of his highlights, I think it was from his junior year, he really had a good shot. I really like the mechanics of his shot. I've noticed that there are very few recruits who I just are like, I watch them shoot and they look great and I don't really see any problems with it. Like Jake was talking about tilt, just having your legs kind of spread out instead of totally square. He seemed to do a good job of that. He didn't have his guide hand too much on the ball or on top of the ball, which is often a problem. And he did seem to fade away a bit more than I'd like, but that's just nitpicking. I really liked what I saw from him, and he just seemed like a really pure shooter, which is something that you don't really see in college very often. Especially from like somebody who's 6'6", I could see him fitting into a 2-guard role really well, where like a player like Thomas Allen, who's a really good 3-point shooter, everybody knows that, he's kind of undersized because you usually want that to be your 2-guard being the guy who can shoot, and then your point guard being the guy who can really like carry the ball and distribute to others, which I know Allen can do too, more than probably Carrington can. But I really like to see that tall, lengthy guy who can play good defense. I'm hoping that he should be able to be a solid defender. He seems pretty big. And just have that guy play good defense against their 2-guard and be able to just come up, shoot threes, provide space for all the other players on the team. So I'd be interested to see. I don't know if he'll play this year. I doubt he'll redshirt because, like I've always said, people don't tend to redshirt this year. But I could see him just coming into a role. I really do like Amir Harris, and maybe he'll take a lot of those minutes, but I think we really could see some minutes for a guy who can shoot and hopefully just create spacing across the court this season. So now I'd like to get into a few cleanup things with just recruiting and how that's going. So we got a verbal commit from the guard Donovan Williams, who actually plays here in Lincoln for North Star. I think the Risky Roadz podcast might have to make an appearance at a North Star game this year. But he is a player for the 2020 class who is actually the brother of Bryson Williams, who I think played for Southeast, but is now going to be playing for Wisconsin, who is ranked 4th, as you guys probably know, for the upcoming football season, obviously. Or I guess not obviously, but yeah, Bryson was a football player, which I think is exciting for Donovan because hopefully he'll be a really good athlete and kind of a big guy who can be really strong and bully people around on the court. 24/7 Sports has him as a shooting guard who's 6'5" and 190 pounds. They have him ranked nationally as the 138th player in his class and 32nd best shooting guard. also the best